So the second assignment is going to give us a chance to practice the programming of the interface, programming the browser using the JavaScript programming language. In addition to that, also introduce us to using jQuery as a library that is going to abstract the browser so that we can program just with a single API and not have to worry about the different vendors, the different versions of JavaScript, and have jQuery handle all those kinds of things. So to practice our knowledge of JavaScript and get used to interacting with the browser programmatically, we're going to build this little interface. It's going to be a user management console that's going to allow us to create, update, delete the users that are going to be using the this learning management system, right? It's going to be a table. You can use a table. You can actually use a table for this. And at the top is going to be a form where we can type the username, password, first name, last name, and role of the user we want to create. We can click on the plus sign, and it will add this user to as a user of the system. We can it will appear as a row underneath. We can that particular user, we can click on the X button to remove that user. We can click on the pencil so that if we want to select because we want to edit that user, we're going to copy the information for that user onto the form so that it appears on the on this input fields, and then we can edit any information, change the role, and click on the OK checkbox here, and then it will update the information. Yes. Some of the students would prefer to do something like if you click on the edit, it would replace all the fields with like an embedded input field. That'd be pretty cool, right? So that if you want to edit, you can edit in place as opposed to copying to the top form and editing on the top form. If you want to do that instead, that's even better. That's more challenging, but if you want to do that, then that's fine. The information of the information of the actual list of users will be maintained on a remote server, right? As opposed to storing it here in the client. Like storing in the client makes no sense, right? There's no the client would not know about logging in and whatnot, right? It needs to be stored in a server. You don't need to implement the server. I will provide the server for you, right? I will show how to interact with the server using Ajax, another topic that we'll be talking about this week, how to interact with remote servers, right, that can provide data for us. Make sense? Right? It goes on to suggest naming conventions on how you should name certain things. Also, here's an example on a sequence diagram explaining the sequence of events as our tool boots up, right? As it's first loaded. So at our first load of the of this little page, the user comes to the browser. From the browser, you ask for a particular HTML file. The HTML file will be hosted in our Java server, the one we've been using for the first couple of weeks, right? It's the same from assignment 1. The same service is going to download onto the browser. The browser is going to parse the HTML file. And once it parses it, it realizes that HTML file is going to reference a JavaScript file and it's going to reference a CSS file, right? So it's going to go back to the same server to download those two files. We'll download them to the browser in its cache. Once it has everything, it's going to parse the whole document. It's going to create a DOM, right, document object model, right? And once it has it in memory, it'll render the page, right, once it has a DOM. And the intent of the JavaScript that we're going to be writing is to programmatically manipulate that DOM. By manipulating the DOM, we manipulate what the browser renders, right? We can grab things from the DOM, we can remove them, we can add new things to the DOM, right? We can change what's already in the DOM, and as we modify the DOM programmatically, the user interface changes. Yes, right? So once this JavaScript downloads, right, it executes run, right? It runs the controller JavaScript file, and the first thing that it does, this JavaScript file, what it'll do is call find all users. This is another file that gets downloaded, which is not listed here. it's a second JavaScript file that gets downloaded, which actually does the AJAX call out to the server. This is the server I am providing. Right? It's gonna send the request, an HTTP request, to this /API/users. It's going to ask for all the users who are registered. At first, the array is going to come back with an array. The first array is going to be empty because no one was registered. Yes, it's going to come back with an empty array. But as you add another more users, and if you refresh the page, it'll come back with an array of users, of objects in there. Yes. So that the response will be an array of objects. Formatted in JSON format, JavaScript object notation. It'll go to the controller. The controller is going to iterate over the array, and for each instance in the array, it's going to add a new row to the HTML table. Make sense? Right? There's quite a few other things in here that allow you to delete a user, find a user, create a user, update a user. There's a whole bunch of other things here, but we'll talk about them as we progress. Any questions? Right. It then goes on to suggest that these are the file names you should use for the template. You should use user admin, template, client.html. For the CSS, you already know. For the JavaScript, it should be a controller client as opposed to a template, so template controller. The model is optional. If you feel comfortable with JavaScript models and classes and things like that, go ahead and use it. If you don't, if you've never used classes, it's optional. You don't need it. And in the service, this is another JavaScript file that's going to encapsulate the actual network communication back and forth from the server. Right? I'll provide that, at least a starting code for you. This just explains the naming convention, which you should already know. This gives you some starting code on how the HTML could be written. Gives you some startup code with creating the table itself, which we looked at it. I think late last week we looked at some of the tables last week. Creating the form at the top, creating some of the buttons using Font Awesome, creating the search is optional. This icon here, the search. If you feel that this assignment is too easy, and you want a little more challenge, you could also implement the search feature. The search feature allows you to type, maybe select a role, select maybe a last name, and you click on search. It'll query the server looking for all the users who have that faculty, that role, right, or that last name, things like that, right? So it does a search, right? Find users that meet that criteria. Again, that's optional, right? If you feel that this is underwhelming. What else? So the form, the body. Here's a row. The first row can be used as a template, so you can copy that first row and paste. For every user, you can copy and paste it over and over and over. You can use that. Just remember to commit. We don't want you to work throughout your entire assignment, right? Have these 5 files and having just one commit. Make sure that every time you reach a stable state of your code to commit. Styling, the model is optional. The controller file. Today we're going to get started on this controller file, so we'll get started on this. This is where you have handlers, so that if you click on the button to create somebody, it'll be handled in this function. The final user is the when it boots up, the first thing that it does, it goes and finds everybody from the server, comes back and has an array. This is to delete a user. This is to select the user. To handle the buttons that to select, to delete, to update a user. And these are the ones who allow you to iterate over the array and actually dynamically render these, one row per user, right? And we'll work on a couple of these today, right? This is just a description of those functions. This is the this service is where most of the communication to the server is going to happen. The server that I'm providing lives here at webdev generic server Heroku app.com, right? And the way we're going to use it is that since all of you are going to be using the same server, right? Somehow the server needs to know that these are your users and these are your users, and they're not going to overlap. Yes. So it needs a mechanism to create a different data for different folks. And so the way it's going to work is that all the RESTful APIs, all the connections are going to start with API / a unique identifier that you should use to identify you, right? Here I'm using my username. You can use your username if you can guarantee it's unique. If not, use maybe your NUID. Whatever you think it's unique for you, and as long as you're consistent, right, that the data will belong to you and no one else. Obviously, if somebody wants to screw with you and they know your NUID, then they can look at your data. Okay, but I'm not concerned with that. As long as you can guarantee that that is unique for you, okay, then use whatever you think is unique for yourself. The second one here is this users is again, it's also just a random, it's just a keyword, but it describes describes what what is it that you're storing, retrieving, updating. What is it? What domain are you working with, right? If you're working with movies, then it would be movies, right? If we actors, then it would be actors, whatever, right? In this case, we're dealing with users, right? So it's users. Make sense? Right. We'll talk a little more about how to use this. These are the actual functions that go out to the server, and we'll implement a couple of those. Okay, that's it. All right, any questions? All right, so we'll get started playing around with this. We'll do a demo today, right? Again, we'll do some live coding today, just like we did for assignment 1, right? We'll do some live coding, kind of a run through all some of the features that you'll need for the assignment, and then we'll come back on Friday. We'll revisit and talk a little more in detail about each one of the things that we saw today. Yes.
So is there a quiz on Friday?
Yes. Yeah, there'll be a 10-minute quiz on CSS.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Is it straight CSS?
Yeah, just CSS. Everything we've seen. So there might be some Bootstrap. I'm sorry.
Like the border padding margins.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. CSS stuff. Selectors, right? Obviously, some of the more basic transformations. Front color, background. I mean, nothing that we haven't seen on the slides, right? If it's not in the slides, it's not on the quiz. And if it is, let me know and I'll fix it.